tonight it is my honor and my privilege to introduce Troy Torrence. Troy has served as the health management specialist for the Indiana State Police since 2000. Welcome, Troy.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. Yeah, my 25-year anniversary will be tomorrow with the agency. So it's
Excellent. Congratulations. Congratulations, Troy.
kind of crazy. So yeah, I get the honor and I appreciate the opportunity to share some information on our beautiful nose as our topic will be tonight, and a little bit on nasal breathing. This is a lot of stuff that I try to teach our new young men and women coming to the academy, and then also our current generation of officers. And I'll actually be speaking at a CIT training for officer wellness on Friday in Henry County, and I'll be sharing some of this information with them also. So without further ado, the big thing with the nose, as we can see just on our nice, beautiful screen there, is just the big open sinus cavity of just how much space is actually in and up through our nose. So just trying to get a little bit of understanding, what we're going to do is just talk about the importance of nasal breathing and why nasal breathing is so important for us, and how to control, which I have in quotes, control our breath and our nervous system through our breathing patterns. So try to give a little understanding of how we actually breathe while we may exercise, while we may be going through our regular day. But this is a big thing we try to talk about within our professions of law enforcement, and especially in EMS and anyone else, even corrections, is just understanding our breath. As we know, right there, my dog Hugo, they breathe really, really well. Not normally great. He may snore a bit because of the deviated septum he has there at that nose, but just trying to think about every time we actually think about breathing. It could be us sitting on a chair meditating, it could be us exercising like that gentleman on the treadmill, or maybe if we're sleeping, and that's probably the most inefficient way there, is a mouth breather while they're sleeping. So just trying to understand a little bit on how we breathe. So breath work, we know there's multitude of ways to do our breath work. We do it through our mindfulness practices. We can do it within yoga. Again, we talk about exercise. Sleeping is just one. It's going to be a natural rhythm. But the one in the middle that I don't know if too many play around with, which I still do, is the cold shower. Understanding that autonomic nervous system and that automatic response of that big breath in as we get something cold or a good cold shiver really brings us back to our breath. So playing around a little bit in a shower, maybe 30 seconds of turning it cooler, can give you a good adjustment to what is happening with our breath and also our nervous system. So breathing, obviously we know, is essential for life. There's nothing more important. And it's also closely associated with our movement mechanics, our emotional state, and our physiological state. So just understanding our movement mechanics with exercise, just how we move, how we position our bodies, if we are not breathing well or cannot breathe in a proper or in a position while we're exercising and we're struggling to breathe, we may notice we are out of alignment. So just understanding, we always talk about good proper posture when we're finding our seat with our head tall. That thing comes into effect also when we're exercising, to make sure our rib cage isn't open or closed. We're trying to keep that rib cage stacked above our pubic bone to make sure our diaphragm can do its job to help us brace. And then again, our emotional state, we also understand, can go up or down, either sympathetic or parasympathetic, by the way we breathe. And then also our psychological state. So again, if we're in a shallow breathing, we may be more stressed. And if we're more relaxed, we may be having nice, long exhales. So just understanding some basics on breathing. So how many breaths do we take, or how many reps do we do? This one I always share with the recruits to try to get some guesses. Most of us may already kind of know this, but we average about 14,000 all the way up to 40,000 reps. So that 14,000 reps is about what we do if we just sit and exist, just getting our normal breathing reps. But if we're starting to exercise, which I know John loves to ride the bike and do triathlon training, we're going to get a lot of reps. But the big thing that I try to emphasize with all of our trained athletes that we train and also the recruits is, how many times do we actually think about how we breathe? Do we have an intention behind any of our reps? Are we starting to notice that our breath may be being affected by breathing maybe only through my mouth, maybe short and rapid. Just having some intention or practice on how we work our breath can actually help us within our nervous system and also our performance. So again, we know from a cyclical state of stress, when we have some stress in our life, we normally will have a shorter, shallower breathing. We may become more of a mouth breather. We could still be breathing through our nose under stress, but most we may get this nice short upper chest breathing. And as stress increases, we become a little bit more shallow again with our breathing, and then we get into this cyclical cycle of breathing. But if we can notice that we're in this cycle, just taking a simple breath of breathing in and then a longer exhale may be able to bring us out of that little bit of cyclical stress. So just that understanding of our breath and our nervous system can help. So breathing, we're probably doing it wrong. That's my other dog, Flynn. So he's my boy that definitely breathes really, really well. He's not like my French bulldog. He's got a normal nose and can just keep his mouth shut and breathe. So just understanding how are we breathing? Because if we don't control our breath will control us. When I got this from the reflexive performance reset people, when we start working on how our nervous system works and just getting our bodies to fire correctly neurologically, what they bring into a big effect is just the way we breathe affects our neural system and how the body can fire and balance and coordinate. So just getting the body to breathe properly or in a rhythmic fashion can help us control the body. So again, why have a nasal breathing practice? Why should we breathe through our nose? Well, big reasons for it is obviously our increased and improved air quality. When we're looking at breathing, we want to breathe through the natural filter of our nose, which will remove the dust, the pollen, the allergens from the air before it reaches the lungs. That is a natural thing that will happen within our nose. The other big one, if we breathe strictly into our nose, if we can work on that, is a enhanced oxygenation. So this is one, when you dive into the science, that nasal breathing promotes deeper diaphragmatic breathing, which will increase oxygen uptake and improve lung function. And also, while breathing through the nose, we will increase a little bit of nitric oxide, which will help with vasodilation and the actual uptake of oxygen. So we actually get about 10% more oxygen uptake while exercise, as long as we can stay in the nose breathing and staying more in the aerobic system, which I'll cover more in a little bit. Reduced snoring and sleep apnea. So the picture in the front where that gentleman was with his mouth open, when air passes through the nose, it is warmed. We humidify the air. Obviously, we filter that air, but also reduce that likelihood of snoring and improve our sleep quality. So that less chance of the mouth breathing or having a dry mouth. So if you wake up in the morning with a dry mouth, you may have been breathing through your mouth through in the evening while you were sleeping. Doesn't mean you were snoring, but it depends on if you ask your significant other if they were snoring. My French bulldog, he always snores, so don't have to worry about that. From a lower blood pressure, also, nasal breathing will stimulate the production of, again, as we stated just earlier, nitric oxide, the gas that does dilate the blood vessels and lowers blood pressure. So that could be another effect to help us lower our blood pressure. Also improve posture. So we talked about that a little bit before, of just understanding that posture alignment and nasal breathing, and even just breathing properly, of just good breathing mechanics, not chest breathing, but more abdominal or diaphragmatic breathing, can help, because it helps us encourage that proper alignment of the head, neck, and spine. Because when we start to change head position, we become weaker through the system, and also will help us just naturally improve our posture. Also, increasing that athletic performance, which I am always trying to do with my athletes and my recruits, is trying to really work on that performance. So we want to do that by enhancing the oxygenation and regulation of our breathing. Nasal breathing can enhance athletic performance and endurance, but it is a practice skill. It is something that needs to be practiced and utilized, because most of us, if we have not used our nose, we may not be able to use it to its fullest function, because if we don't use it, we can lose it. Just like our aerobic capacity, when we stop working out, our capacity will go down. Same thing with our nose. It takes training for it to become effective. And then to reduce the risk of infections, we already know that the nasal passages act as a barrier against bacteria and viruses due to the filtering of the air, so we don't just take it from our mouth down into our lungs. So this could reduce the risk of some respiratory infections the more we can stay breathing through our nose. And then also promote relaxation and stress reduction. Nasal breathing obviously is associated with slower, deeper breaths. Obviously, we can take in a bit more air through our mouth because the two nostrils that we have are maybe a little bit smaller. And as air comes in, it is spinning and humidifying and heating up as we breathe in. So that can also help us promote that relaxation. So when we look at this little slide here from a proper posture, so mouth breathing, they state obviously we have a little bit of improper posture. We have a blocked airway normally when we are starting to breathe through the mouth because we will shut off the upper part of the glottis. So again, we're just breathing or mouth breathing or gulping. The tongue is not in the roof of the mouth. So when we start to talk about our nasal breathing, which we'll talk on the other side, like we may state in some of our breathing practices when we do meditation, is trying to keep the teeth from not touching, but also the tongue to the roof of the mouth. The mouth could be open still while breathing through your nose, but you have to force the tongue to the roof of your mouth in order for you to close off the back of the throat so the air coming in through your mouth doesn't just go down your throat. You're trying to actually force the breathing through the nose. As we become more of a mouth breather or breathing through our mouth, we will have more of a recessed jawline. So the jaw will become more retracted because our mouth is consistently open and more relaxed. With the nasal breathing, the functional airway is more open, as you can see near the top. You're going to see the airway near the back of the throat is going to be more open because as the top comes down, we don't have it being pinched off and having a smaller airway to take in from the nasal. So again, pushing the tongue to the roof of the mouth helps align the jaw, keeps everything more set, and you have a more of a defined jaw and chin line by utilizing that light force of the tongue on the top of the mouth or on the bridge of the mouth. So practice makes what? We always say practice makes perfect, but practice does actually make progress, is what I always try to tell my athletes. Because yes, we can practice something and we can become perfect at the wrong thing. We always want to do practice and move. As I like to use John Welborn's analogy, move some dirt. Some days we get a spoon, some days we get a shovel. I just want progress. Did we do a little step today? Did we get a little bit better? Did I actually notice when I exercised? Oh, wow, I was mouth breathing more there. I got to start to focus getting back to my nasal breathing. Or am I pushing too hard, having to switch gears, which we'll talk about here in a second. Also, purposeful practice. Do we have a purpose behind the practice? What am I doing? What is my purpose when I practice? Again, am I trying to be perfect or am I trying to make progress? Obviously, we're all trying to strive for perfection, but we have to really work on the progress. Everything that we learn new is going to take time and effort. And sometimes it is tough to become a white belt. We all want to be that black belt and be able to master it, but we're going to have to put in some purposeful practice, as we all do when we practice our meditation. Is it's purposeful. We set an intention and sit and we'll focus. Could be for 2 minutes, could be 10 minutes, but having a purposeful practice. Within the nervous system, switching gears, the nervous system controls everything within our body. Proper breathing patterns are basis for our everyday life, which we talked about, and you cannot thrive without proper breathing. Again, we talk about those closely associated in movement mechanics with the emotional and physiological state. So we've discussed the autonomic nervous system a bunch, and most of us have heard this a ton, but this is a system that is running at all times, both systems at once. So the autonomic nervous system, both the sympathetic or the fight or flight or freeze, or the parasympathetic, the rest or digest. Just understanding in our breathing mechanics as we breathe in, that's a sympathetic response. We're going to increase the heart rate a little bit just due to the diaphragm moving and due to the pressure adjustments in the body. As we exhale, if we can slow our exhale, we can actually increase the parasympathetic response or the rest and digest. The body's going to feel safer. So just understanding those two things. I think we do a great job within law enforcement to teach our men and women to become sympathetic real good. We can get them up and running and going and ready to go, but we don't do a good job on how do we bring them down? How do we downregulate their nervous system? So the practice of mindfulness, the practice of breathing or extending our exhale can help. So just understanding a little bit about the nervous system and what we're trying to do, the extended exhale, trying to stay more parasympathetic. So again, arousal control through our breath. If we can start to control our breath and understand our nervous system, if it's going up or down or we're going slightly sympathetic, then we can start to increase or add a breath practice or a technique to start to bring our nervous system down to help us reduce our stress, reduce some anxiety, and then also increase our alertness if we need to, so we can ramp that nervous system up, but also think about promoting our concentration. The more I can be in tune with my body, knowing where I am on that sliding scale up or down, do I need to increase or do I need to decrease? If I'm too amped up, I may not be able to concentrate. So just understanding how my nervous system and my breath rate is going can help us manage some of our concentration in our skills. So if we truly look at this, this is a chart that we utilize in the law enforcement to give them a little idea of where we are from a heart rate perspective. So this is our exercise people too. These things can happen for law enforcement, our correction officers, really quickly to spike heart rate and not really get a respiratory response at first. So when you look at about 50% of our heart rate, so if we take 220 minus our age and do all the math, you start to look at it about 50% of our heart rate. If we're just normally like we're doing now, maybe even less, normal resting heart rate, we're good. We're green. We move up to about 60%. Our fine motor skills will start to deteriorate. So those fine motor skills of being able to touch, do little things, write, draw, pick things up, start to dissipate a little bit. In that 60 to 70% of our heart rate range, that's our optimal survival or combat. This is where we thrive in sports. We thrive in law enforcement and conflict because complex motor skills are at their best. Visual reaction time is up and our cognitive reaction time is up. That is the sweet spot, kind of the flow state. You have to have a little bit of heart rate. You can't be too relaxed. If we push into that 70 to 80% range, now complex motor skills start to degrade. Those are those bigger ones. The bigger, more muscles, the more coordinated type movements are going to start to deteriorate. We push into the 80 to 90% range. Now we're starting to redline. We're getting pushed outside of our comfort zone. This is where our cognitive processing starts to deteriorate. This is where we're getting into our fight or flight response. The loss of our peripheral vision, we start to field in and start to get some tunnel vision. We also get the loss of depth perception, so we cannot judge distance forward and back. So possibly some crashes that we may have with our department employees may be ramped up due to a chase and they can't judge the time and distance. Loss of near vision, so things up close are harder. And then obviously we know the audio occlusion. If anybody's a deer hunter, they may notice that from hunting in the woods and you shoot, it's like you don't even hear it. But if you're on the gun range and you shoot your gun, it's really, really loud. But with a high heart rate, the audio occlusion can dissipate. And then above 90%, when you're really redline and maxed out, this is the irrational fighting, the fleeing, the submissive behavior, then gross motor skills, running, charging, the highest performance level. All you have left is run, fight at just gross motor skill, or freeze. So just that little understanding can give you a gamut of what is going on in the nervous system along with your heart rate. And obviously breath response as we're getting into that 70 to 80, going into 90, we're going to be breathing pretty hard. We're probably not going to be nasal breathing much at that point. You're probably going to be mouth breathing and really you're going to hear it because of the heart rate. As the heart rate increases, our respiratory rate has to increase because we're needing more oxygen. So as heart rate goes up, respiratory rate's going to go up also. So, how do we breathe? Nose or mouth? Right? It depends. It truly does depend. And the big thing I try to teach my athletes and my staff at the academy and my troopers is that your metabolic demand will dictate your most efficient path. So metabolic demand is what is the demand on your body right now? Am I just walking? I should be able to breathe through my nose. Should not be an issue. If I start jogging, can I maintain nasal breathing? If I run a little harder, can I stay in my nose? If I'm sprinting, can I stay nasal breathing, or am I running too hard or biking too fast? Do I have to now switch to mouth breathing? So again, your metabolic demand is going to be one of those things that will dictate it, but it does take practice. So a short little visual time. I want you to think about real quick a time you were exercising. If you want to keep your eyes open or closed, you can do this. It's a short little exercise. There's a perfect pun there. We're not actually exercising, but this is an exercise. The last time you exercised, maybe went for a jog, got on a bike, or actually started running, or just went for a nice walk. Do you remember how you were breathing? Did you focus on your actual breath? So when you went out for a jog in the first couple minutes, did you just start running and just start breathing through your mouth? Or did you have an intention to breathe through your nose and rev up your nervous system? So that is one that I utilize a bunch with my recruits. In the beginning, I don't tell them how to breathe. I just watch them run, and most of them will go straight to the sympathetic response of mouth breathing. So Brian McKenzie and the people over at Shift Adapt has a great slide. I may have used this one in the past, but this one is really great, and I do like using this because it talks about their gear system. And this is more for our exercisers and how to train ourselves to breathe through our nose a little bit more efficiently. So, right at the bottom left is gear one. That is your in and out of your nose easy. I can just walk all day and I can just breathe through my nose, or like the talk test. If you ever knew in the talk test is kind of knowing where your aerobic capacity is or your aerobic system is if you can walk and you can get 3 to 4 words out and then have to take a breath, you're in a good low heart rate at probably zone one and maybe touching into zone two. If you're having to breathe every other every other word or so, you're probably now pushing into zone three or zone four. You're starting to have to breathe a little bit harder. So again, starting out on your exercise, trying to think about gently breathing in and out of your nose. As we start to increase our cadence or our speed in our exercise or just sitting on a bike, you'll notice we'll start to naturally go into gear two, which is in through the nose and out through the nose again. But now we're talking about the edge. We're thinking more of a powerful breathing. So again, in the first part on the right says even cadence on work. Now we're in power in, power out. We're on what we call the aerobic edge. This is where our body is going to function for a very long time in the aerobic or with oxygen system. As we get pushed be outside that and our metabolic demand is increasing, now we hit gear three, in through the nose or the mouth. Again, this may switch for some, but most of us will be in through the nose and out through the mouth. We're noticing that now I have to slough maybe some more oxygen out, or we may have been reversing, go mouth breathing in and nasal breathing out. But this is that powerful in and powerful out. We're really trying to force that air in and out quickly, but now we're transitioning to what we would consider our anaerobic system without oxygen. And again, that would be hitting our into our gear number four, which is we're going to eventually hit the point of our aerobic threshold, going all anaerobic, and that's just, and we're breathing super hard in and out. And that is where we are in that anaerobic or panicked forced exhale. So this is where our work is getting super high in that super ventilatory aspect. So we're hitting it. Most people that I will see when I first get them training is they will go directly to gear 4 at a very low heart rate. They're just because they haven't practiced their nasal breathing. So it does take time and it'll take some effort. Now, to recover from our gear number 4, we'd work into that panic or forced exhale, similar to the physiological sigh that Huberman talks about, where it's the big breath out. We're thinking about trying to come out of that gear 4, really blow that air out as fast and hard as we can. We're trying to extend to get us back out of that high fight or flight situation. Forced exhale a few times. And then as we start to get into that gear 3, as we're trying to bring ourselves down, passive inhale, longer exhale. So very similar to our straw breathing. So taking a breath can still be in through the mouth because we still may be high on our metabolic demand, but can we start to extend our exhale? Why did we want to extend our exhale? To start to bring ourselves parasympathetic or downregulate the nervous system. Then the next phase that we're trying to do is that optimal pause at the top and then extend our exhale. So you may take a breath in and then exhale. You will know when you can do this is when you try to hold your breath and you and you panic still. You may be trying to go from that gear 3 to gear 2 on the down regulation. You may not be able to pause at the top of that inhale. But this is where you're starting to understand your nervous system on your recovery. And then when you get down to that full recovery, we're at a natural, even cadence. So that kind of gives you how we can ramp ourselves up and how we can bring our nervous system down. So again, why is nasal breathing so important? We can get about 10 to 20% more oxygen uptake. So those that are training for our cyclists, our rowers, things of that nature, can we sit for most of our training, not the high threshold, that zone 4, zone 5, but that zone 1, 2, maybe touching 3, because if you get really good at this, you can probably push into 3 and still stay through our nose. So we can start to get a little more oxygen uptake due to the nitric oxide and other things happening. We know it warms and humidifies the air, remove a significant amount of germs and bacteria, so we're not just gulping it in. That nitric oxide obviously will help with the nasal airways and important in that vasoregulation, so understanding inside the cells. Calms and soothes the body to engage that parasympathetic nervous system. If we did the mouth on that side and we stay in the mouth breathing for our exercise, it results in more of a upper respiratory, upper chest breathing. We're not getting a good diaphragmatic breathing. And most people have some issues starting the nasal breathing because the diaphragm is having to do a lot of work that we may not have been training the diaphragm in our aerobic work. Obviously, causing a dry mouth, increased acidity in the mouth may result in more cavities and gum disease. Mouth breathing children are at a greater risk for developing the forward head posture and reduce respiratory strength. So that ability to breathe through the nose, we're utilizing that diaphragmatic power and that diaphragmatic breath. And then also significantly can increase the occurrence of snoring or obstructive apnea because we're not utilizing our nose. So it takes some practice. So, as I mentioned earlier, when we breathe, that first breath in, even if through the nose or the mouth, we're going to have a slight sympathetic response. That just means a little bit of an increase of heart rate. And again, on our exhale, that's the relaxation and that diaphragm relaxing. So we're not having all that compaction in the system. Will start to bring us more into that parasympathetic little bit of down regulation. So getting through some of the science and all of the things, we want to cover some skills and some drills. So, what is our intent or our intention? We always think about this, or we should be thinking about this when we're practicing our mindfulness or practicing our meditation or doing a walking meditation or just simply going about our day. So, we're going to think about setting our intention. This day, we forced, as I say, not a forced word, but I had the intention to have our recruits only cycle through their nose and breathe. Right there, he started to have to pierce his lips pretty hard, but most were staying at a pace where they can maintain the nasal breathing and work on some practice. So, with purposeful practice within our strength training or our aerobic capacity, either walking, biking, or running, or even in some of our more higher intense exercise, trying to start with nasal breathing only. And I make a small suggestion of it about 3 to 4 weeks. It's not going to be something that's going to happen within 1 or 2 training sessions. Just like trying to diet, we don't lose 5 pounds in one day by just skipping a meal. We really need to start to have a small intention within the practice, maybe just the warm up for 5 or 10 minutes each day, just to get the nose to start working and then start to practice a little bit of that, or take every other session and say, hey, I'm only going to run as fast as I can as long as I can only breathe through my nose. And you'll be surprised pretty quickly that you have to slow down pretty fast because you feel like you're running out of air. But understanding the gear system and slowly increasing your pace, and you'll find your threshold to where you can bounce up against it. So, our first little skill that I'm going to lead us in is going to be the alternating nostril breathing technique. So, for those that may or may not have done this practice before, what we're going to utilize, you can use either hand. We're going to use our thumb and our ring finger. And all we're going to practice, and I'll explain it first and then we'll do it, is we're going to take and use our thumb to plug. You'll use our right hand. It may be looking like my left hand on screen, but we're going to take our right hand and we're going to plug our right nostril. And how it'll work is I'm going to breathe in through my left nostril, and then I'm going to close the opposite with my ring finger, and I'll direct us through this and close that left nostril. Then I'm going to breathe out my opposite side and then breathe back in on that same side. So what we're going to work on is getting our left and right hemispheres of the brain to work, because now we're going to use some alternating nasal breathing. So without further ado, if you want to practice this, we're going to take our right hand and we're going to close our right nostril, and we're going to just simply breathe in through our left nostril. Just a natural breathing rate. Once you feel you've got the breath in, take your ring finger, close your left nostril, and slowly exhale out of your right nostril. Once you've exhaled, breathe back in through the right. Once you've gotten your breath, take your thumb, pinch your right nostril, breathe back out your left. We'll go back in, hold, we'll breathe out the right. Breathe back in, pinch that nostril, and we'll breathe out the opposite. Again, working at your own pace. It's not trying to force your inhale, but once you've gotten your inhale, plug that side and then breathe out your opposite. Once you breathe out, you'll breathe back in that nostril, close that nostril, and then breathe out the opposite. We'll do 2 more reps on that left nostril. So 2 more reps on your own. You may notice, like me, my left nostril isn't working the greatest right now, and that may be normal. And some of us may have a perfect breathing through both nostrils right now. Perfect. This should be our last rep. And let your breathing come back to natural. So you may or may not notice through the day when you're breathing or start to have an intention of breathing through your nose, you may notice one side may not be breathing well. I know my left right now is a little stuffed up, but through the day, my left nostril becomes open, my right one closes. It's just something that is natural within the body. So moving on, to the 5x5 breath. I'm going to turn a little bit of this over to John to help lead because he did a great thing last week when we were practicing our breath work, was really getting us to focus on our nasal breathing, but be very silent with our breath. So I'll turn it over to John for a couple rounds of 5x5 breath work.
Great, Troy, thanks. So is this our box breathing?
This one will just be a 5-second inhale. So an HRV,
Okay,
the
okay.
HRV, 5-second inhale, 5 exhale. Sorry.
No, that's good. That's good. Yeah, tempo. Yeah, I've heard this called a couple different things, and I have heard, Troy, that this can help to build our HRV, which is an indication of a healthy stress response, meaning the body's able to move into recovery, move into that relaxation recovery response. So 5x5 breathing, we're simply going to breathe in through our nose and breathe out through our nose, equal duration. And we'll just make it real simple. So let's all start now with an exhale. So let's exhale now and breathing in through the nose. 2, 3, 4, 5. Breathing out through the nose. 2, 3, 4, 5. Continuing in. 2, 3, 4, 5. And out through the nose. 2, 3, 4, 5. So continuing in this way. Now for yourself, if you feel that these durations are a little long or a little short, please take your lead to adjust them so that they're easy and sustainable. So this is a type of breathing, breath regulation that we can hold for really extended periods of time. So we don't want to have a sense that we're pushing, straining, stressing, either too long or too short. Right? So continuing on with breathing in through the nose and then breathing out through the nose. And we can start to concentrate on or focus in on what does that actually feel like in the nostrils. Particularly as you breathe in, you may actually feel the little filter hairs moving a little bit. And when you breathe out, you may have a sense that the breath is a little warmer. It is. It's a little warmer. It's a little moisture. So you may be able to pick up those subtleties. But as we are sort of driving our attention and focus into some of the finer details or subtler sensations as we breathe, the encouragement here is to, as you can, reduce the actual sound. Allow it to be very smooth. And approach silence. If you can approach, towards silence with your breathing. There are different types of meditative breathing where that's the sort of one of the driving cues is to have a very silent breath. So this is not particularly meditative, but it is certainly training our nasal breathing habit, right? So we're certainly creating neural pathways to support nasal breathing. And we're focusing on that, right? So when we're doing something repetitive and we're very conscious of it, and as Troy has said, we intentionally do this, this is the quickest way for us to develop neural pathways, to develop new behaviors, habitual behaviors. That paying attention part is very helpful. So just continue. Just keep breathing through your nose. Same duration in as duration out. And as you can, nice and quiet. So if somebody was sitting beside you, they might not even be able to perceive that you're breathing. But again, we want the sustainable, easy. Don't force it. We don't want to force yourself. But I'm sure you're familiar with Hollywood actors who train themselves to do this. And if they're playing dead, if they're in a scene where their life has been taken, they're lying in the front of the camera and they appear not to be breathing, right? So this is certainly attainable. This is very much something that we can develop. Okay, so let's just take two more of these cycles on your own time, their duration. And good. So, Troy, we could move to the next one.
Yes. So the one I think John was talking about was he did a great practice last week. I knew we could add it in with the 5x5, but the basic box breathing with the same intention of that very quiet breath rate of trying to slowly breathe through our nose, so we don't hear it or to be too forceful. So, John, if you want to lead just a couple rounds, maybe just one or two rounds of the basic box breathing. And
Yeah, very good. So, box breathing is, if you're not familiar with, we do four sections of it. There are four equal durations. There's an in breath and then a pause or a breath hold. There's an exhale and then a pause or a hold and then another inhale. So I'll do this counting four on each of those durations and just give this a try. And as we're all basically sitting relatively still, we may be able to get into that fairly quiet, light, long, light breath. So let's all take an exhale at this point. And we can breathe in through the nose, 2, 3, 4, and pause. 2, 3, 4, out through the nose. 2, 3, 4, and pause. 2, 3, 4, in through the nose. 2, 3, 4, pause. 2, 3, 4, out through the nose. 2, 3, 4, and pause. 2, 3, 4. So do take this on your own. Again, adjust these durations to make them sustainable for you. Maybe 4 and 4 is fine. Maybe as you develop this, it kind of naturally wants to go to 5, 5, and 5. So it can be light and low. And we may be able to connect with the movement of the diaphragm as well. So as you come to completion of this cycle, or maybe we can look at the next breath regulation.
so the last one would be a version of the straw breath, and I may be a little bit different, and John may have done one of this, but thinking instead of the pierced lips, thinking about can we make the almost a humming sound, but trying to breathe still through the nose. So we're still kind of getting that forceful exhale, almost like we're sighing, but trying to breathe through the nose. So we're changing that from a to a breathing through the nose from a straw breath.
Great, Troy, do you want to guide this one then?
Sure.
Please.
So with the typical straw breathing, we will do maybe a 3-second inhale and then followed by a doubling or doubling the length of a 6-second exhale, could be 4 seconds. So again, trying to think about what is comfortable for you. So if I take in a 3-second inhale and then I'm breathing out I'm going to try to see if I can make a noise or maybe even a growl, but trying to force, not just blowing my nose, but try to make a sound as we start to breathe out. So if we want to all start with a small exhale, we'll do a 3-second count. So breathing out, and we'll breathe in, 2, 3, exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Inhale, 2, 3, exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Inhale, 2, 3, exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll do 2 more reps on your own, varying your length if you need to see if you need to increase or decrease the breath rate. Very good. After your second one, just let your breath come back to normal. That one may be a little more difficult. I use this one during some strength training, so similar to me doing the Valsalva maneuver where we would close the glottis and hold breath and bear down while we're exercising, but I'll force air out, but try to not breathe out through my mouth. So I'm trying to force that air out still through my nose. So kind of a little bit different version of the straw breath. And then again, I have to throw the cold showers in there. If you don't practice your breathing in the shower, it's the best opportunity. We shower every day. So this is from Wim Hof, very first week, 15 seconds. Can we just make it a little cooler for 15 seconds? 5 days. And then each week is an increase of 15 seconds. And then week 2 would be trying to get 30 seconds and 45. And oh, yeah, week 4 would be a whole minute. Makes it a little bit of a challenge, but gets you to practice on slowing our breath and understanding what is happening within our nervous system while we're taking a shower. And again, how do we sleep? Hopefully, we're not breathing that way. We hopefully are sleeping like this nice little baby and getting a nice little breathing in with the mouth closed. Or obviously, my wife, she didn't like when I had the hostage tape or the tape on my mouth, but sometimes I had to tape my mouth shut just to make sure I could force myself to nasal breathe. So there is some research out there and some literature on it to kind of help. I have done some practice while I'm exercising too with some tape on a bike, just so it forces me to stay in more of my aerobic state. And then if we're looking for some resources, there's some great books. If you have not read Patrick McEwen's Oxygen Advantage, very good book. Pretty deep read, pretty thick, but a lot of good information there. James Nestor, he's been on a few different podcasts, another one on breath, sorry. Biggest one there is a really good breakdown of just how the body breathes and everything. Dan Brule, love that book, Just Breathe. I take an excerpt out of his book all the time where he's talking about being in the military and when the drill instructor was yelling at him. And he goes, once I learned the straw breath, if I would have known that in the military, I wouldn't have been so stressed. Just being able to sigh it out a little bit would help so much. And then Richie Bobstock was exhale. So there's a lot of good stuff out there, a lot of good things out there, podcasts and so on and so forth. Wanted to end it with just that little bit of practice with starting to think about our intent and our intention with our nasal breathing and possibly some health benefits that we could get with that nasal breathing through just starting to think about how it can start to maybe help us from bacterial. Obviously, as we start to get into the fall, all of our allergies are starting to get to us. We have to breathe through our mouth sometimes. I don't expect you when you're sleeping that, oh, I have to breathe through my nose because we're going to get stuffed up. That's going to be some of it. And then also understanding it does take practice to get more comfortable breathing through our nose. So again, that 3 to 4 weeks doesn't seem, it seems like forever, but if you're adding 5 to 10 minutes in part of your exercise routine to have an intention to utilize it, you'll be surprised at how much easier it becomes to breathe through your nose. And the way I will practice it is getting on a bike and slowly increase my RPMs. So I may start at a really very steady state that I could sit there and talk and not even really have to breathe. So barely zone one, and then start to ramp up 2 to 4 RPM and hold that for 2 minutes and just keep breathing. After that 2 minutes, I ramp it up again. And as I start to ramp up or slowly pick up my pace, my respiratory rates got to increase. And as I start to do that, I notice my nose starts to warm, starts to humidify, get a little more moist, and actually it will start to open up and I can breathe better through my nose. So it does take some time to get the body warmed up. And most of us, I know like I do, oh, it's time to run. I just go run. I don't warm the system up. So I always talk about getting the chili hot. Nobody likes cold chili. Unless you do, then you like cold chili. But if you want good chili, you have to warm it up. That's like your body. Get a little sweat going and then start to practice these things from if you're going to do it from an exercise perspective. So hopefully I shared a little bit of information tonight on breathing through our nose and some good importance behind it, both physiologically, psychologically, and neurologically, and just how our whole system works.
Thank you so much for bringing all that forward. And we have a minute or two, so let's please open it up to anyone on the floor here.
You know, there's a lot that I've learned, and I am a CPAP man.
Yes, it works. You have to get through the nose, and it's a lifesaver for most of us, the CPAP for sure. To get you to sleep. Sleep is the biggest thing that if we can harness anything, it's getting people to sleep better.